Alright, I am back with another video, and today we are doing the next in the single class party build lineup, Paladins. And I think Paladin was the only one that was voted for. Like, every single comment said Paladin, 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 Paladin. And I'm just like, damn, I guess we're doing Paladins. I think a big reason why everyone wanted me to do Paladins is it is one of the few classes in the game that actually does have 4 subclasses that we can use. And I guess it made perfect sense to kind of go with that. But as you can see, there are only 3 characters on screen at the moment. And we'll get to why that's the case in a moment. But for now, let's get into the builds, because I actually think I have found a way to make a very interesting and unique party, both story and combat-wise. Each of these characters actually has a completely unique playstyle. In a way, well, I say completely unique, they definitely do differ, which is more than I thought I was actually initially going to be able to accomplish with Paladins. Because while Paladins are quite, you know, they are quite diverse. You can have strength and dex builds, you can have builds that focus slightly more on the magic casting side than the melee side, but the main issue with Paladins is that if you have a party of all Paladins, which realistically you shouldn't, so I guess this is more of a downside of this specific video rather than the general party composition of BG3, is that if you have 4 fully leveled Paladins, they're not actually that different from each other, especially when it comes to the spellcasting side of things. As the subclasses, well, they do provide slightly different options. They don't change the base way that the class plays like some other subclasses do. So you do have 4 characters that do feel a little bit samey if you don't build them correctly. And I think I have. I think I've got 4 surprisingly distinct playstyles. Not completely unique, after all, we are using the same class 4 times, but I think you'll be quite surprised by how I'm able to make these work. So, let's get into it. Kicking us off, we have our Oath of Ancients Paladin. In this case, I've gone for a kind of wood elf, because I almost wanted to kind of apply the idea of, what if we just kind of make a druid paladin, without actually making a druid, but definitely having someone who's got that druidic vibe to them, so we've got the more kind of leathery medium armor rather than the big bulky heavy armor. I've gone for a slightly more dex-focused build, with a focus on the spellcasting side of things, rather than just being all about melee. And druids are normally seen with a quarterstaff, and while I tried to make a quarterstaff work on this build, the fact that we had to use strength for it kind of bummed me out, so I got the next best thing, which is a finesse weapon that is two-handed, the Dancing Breeze, which I thought was a really kind of nice feeling weapon to use with this build, as it kind of still gives that kind of druid silhouette, but with that kind of paladin twist on it. It's not just someone who's come out of the woods with a stick and the ability to speak to animals. They are still a warrior at the end of the day, but they have a slightly different focus. And as you can see, for the Oath of the Ancients Paladin, I have decided to put most of the focus on their unique strength compared to the other Paladins, which is their ability to heal much more effectively. So yes, this is the healer for the party. And of course that comes with the usual healer equipment, that being Wapira's Crown for the additional healing. And the Whispering Promise, which is going to allow us to gain a +1 d4 bonus to attack rolls and saving throws. So basically casting Bless, whenever we heal a creature, they all gain Bless. So if we have a group-wide healing spell, which we kind of do as long as we stay close together with the unique Healing Radiance feature that Ancients Paladin gets, we can actually apply Bless quite easily with this build, and if we combine that with Lay on Hands, which at full level of Paladin does do a pretty damn decent chunk of healing, we can spread the heals quite easily. Combining this also with Warden of Vitality to be able to restore HP to everyone as a bonus action each turn. I thought this cost you concentration. It actually doesn't, so you can do this for free and still do the other concentration options that you get with this build, which is actually really, really nice. And we're also able to play into the healing aspect even more, using things like the Broodmember's Revenge to get a bit of poison damage, which felt a bit druidy in a way. And also we're able to use the Ring Till Death Do Us Part to give us a use of Beacon of Hope to maximize once per long rest. It doesn't take up our very limited spell slots, so that we have a concentration spell that we can focus on that's going to give our healing even more oomph, which I really, really like. And again, I decided to lean more into the charisma side of things because I wanted to be able to use this build to get as much healing as possible, because again, Healing Radiance And other healing features from this build, like such as Cure Wounds, do scale off of our Charisma, so I wanted to make sure that we had as much of that as possible. But yeah, I'm quite happy with this build, and again, it comes in with the kind of druidic nature vibe. We're going to get some unique abilities like Ensnaring Strike, so we're able to trap enemies. We get Speak with Animals like a druid would. Protection from Poison also felt quite on theme, and also Elemental Weapon. If we don't want to concentrate on Beacon of Hope, concentrating on Elemental Weapon would actually make sense. We get to pull in the elements from nature, because things like Nature Cleric, their Divine Strike has like lightning, ice, and fire, so being able to kind of pull that kind of vibe in as well with Elemental Weapon, giving ourselves a bit of a boost in the process if we wanted to switch to a more of a melee focus, we can absolutely do that. I've just noticed we have a resistance. Oh yeah, we have spell resistance. Oh yeah, because of the auras. I'll get to them in a minute. But again, we also get things like Nature's Wrath, being able to restrain enemies. Turn the Faithless, being able to turn Fae and Fiends. Again, this party actually has a lot of battlefield control, because we have things like, Turn the Faithless here, and we'll also gain things like Turn Undead later as well. We also get some cool thematic spells like Moonbeam and Misty Step, Magic Weapon, Plant Growth, Daylight. And even if we wanted to play on that kind of Fury of the Elements thing, we can throw Searing Smite on here as well. And of course, we get things like Aid as well to be able to provide a ton of support to the rest of the party. So yeah, while this build can absolutely hold its own in melee combat, its main focus is battlefield support, healing, keeping the party topped up, being able to maneuver around the battlefield, as well as using the unique auras to be able to boost the party's defenses that way. Of course, Aura of Protection is going to be standard across all of our Paladins, and they'll always have that activated, so we don't actually need to stay close together in order to be able to get that benefit to saving throws, which is really, really nice. But that +5 to saving throws overall is going to be great for maintaining concentration and keeping us out of danger when it comes to things like Fireball. And having this across all of our characters without needing to stay close together is actually really, really nice. Paladin has so much going for it, especially with a team comp like this. But of course, we also have the Aura of Warding, which is the unique aura from Ancient's Paladin, which of course is going to give us basically resistance to spells, which I just showed off, which is insane. And if this party kind of has two combat styles, either they spread out across the battlefield, or they kind of bunch up together and kind of buff each other really close up and kind of form almost like that old Spartan fighting style, like that Roman fighting style, like a bulwark or whatever it's called, where they kind of all stand together, get ready, and fight. And I think that's kind of cool. You have the ability to maneuver around the battlefield or stay close together. And of course, if they stay close together, everyone is going to be resistant to spell damage, which is actually really, really cool. And then also, all of our Paladins are going to have Aura of Courage, meaning that we cannot be frightened. I just realized that I forgot that existed. That's actually kind of funny. So yeah, so you and nearby allies cannot be frightened, and as well as charmed as well if we use the aura from Aura of Devotion as well. So I think that could actually be pretty nice. So overall, you've got quite a lot of options for defense here. So we have defense, we have healing, we have offense, we have everything that we want in this build. So let's get into the actual equipment and why I made the choices I did. I've already gone over the kind of healing kind of stuff here, as well as Broodmother's Revenge, so I'll just quickly discuss the rest. As I said, Dancing Breeze is a finesse weapon, meaning that we don't have to put points into strength to use it. It's a +2 weapon, and again, it's kind of just there for the vibe. A 1d10 +6 is quite nice. It also allows us to pick up this build's unique feat, because all of these builds have feats. We've got, where is it? Where is it? It should be here. I definitely picked up Polearm Master. I'm not crazy. Yeah, Polearm Master is on this build. I don't know why it's not coming up. Okay, I don't know why Polearm Master isn't showing up on the menu here, because it was definitely here, and it was used in the combat footage, so I have absolutely no idea. But yes, we do have Polearm Master on this build. Perhaps it's just a visual bug. And overall, it does help us kind of get into that combat style a bit more. We're able to make attacks with a bonus action. Although our bonus action is going to be pretty heavily used up with this build, we also do gain access to, like, you know, being able to do the, when people come in range of us, we get to make an opportunity attack against them. It just kind of leans more into that, like, big two-handed weapon playstyle, but Polearm Master is actually completely optional for this build. If you wanted to go a different route, you absolutely could. But yeah, so we do have Polearm Master here to work with the Dancing Breeze. We also have the Sharpened Snare Cuirass. Because I've gone with the Gloves of Dexterity to instantly set our Dexterity to 18, we're going to be able to use the Sharpened Snare Cuirass, which adds our full Dexterity modifier, and creatures have disadvantage on saving throws against resisting our attacks and spells that inflict restrained. So things like Ensnaring Strike or Nature's Wrath should work with this feature, so that means that we can basically use a lot of battlefield control to keep our enemies in check, and we can do that at both melee and ranged thanks to our bow. Throw any bow in this slot, it doesn't really matter what bow you choose. I've just gone with the Deadshot here because it's a decent Act 3 option, but any bow you pick up throughout your playthrough will work. And finally, because this build does get Misty Step naturally, and also creates a lot of difficult terrain, I thought that Disintegrating Nightwalkers would actually be a good choice here, meaning that we cannot be enwebbed, entangled, or ensnared, and cannot slip or grease or ice, and we get an extra usage of Misty Step that doesn't cost a spell slot once per short rest, allowing us even more battlefield maneuverability, allowing us to teleport near enemies, near allies that need healing, or near enemies that need stopping. Overall, what you're going to be getting out of this specific build is you're going to be getting everything that a Paladin kind of likes to have, but with a focus on battlefield support and healing, which is going to come in really, really helpful. The combat footage that you will be seeing, or would have seen a little bit of already, unfortunately I didn't really get to use the full potential of the healing, but you could absolutely see where I was coming from about how to make it work, especially since in that combat footage, I learned a very valuable lesson. Don't raise the dead in Act 3 in public, because it has some consequences I was not aware of. You'll see what I mean when we get to the combat footage in full. But yeah, I'm quite happy with how this turned out. It does kind of carry a unique thing to it, and the best part about it is that pretty much everything here, I think, except for the Till Death Do Us Part ring, is obtainable at least in Act 2 at the latest, and the Dancing Breeze as well is only obtainable in Act 3, as well as the bow. I shouldn't have said that. There are quite a few Act 3 options here, but the bow is not required, and the Dancing Breeze is just an end goal. A fun thematic early game option actually would be the Thorn Blade. The Thorn Blade is a scimitar, meaning it's also finesse, it's going to use our dexterity, while concentrating, which we can do with this build quite a lot. Our melee weapon attacks deal an additional bit of poison damage, so that kind of still fits the theme, and it also gives us a usage of Ensnaring Strike melee once per long rest. So again, it just kind of fits into the theme of the build, and you can get it a lot earlier on, but I quite like the Dancing Breeze a bit more for the end game. So yeah, that is the Ancients Paladin for this build. We are getting a ton of healing, like I say, and utility and support, which is exactly what we want. And she's run away because I clicked off. Get back here, you. Right, there we go. So that is the first of our builds. Let's get on to the second. And this is one where I think I've got quite an interesting and unique playstyle. I think you guys are going to enjoy this one if I can get the camera in a decent position. There we go. So, how many times have you seen this character archetype, especially in, like, anime or something? You get, like, the Holy Knight who uses a rapier and they're, like, zooming all over the battlefield, like, doing piercing attacks. That's something I kind of wanted to capture with this build, and I think I've come up with a really unique gameplay loop for it. And it involves around the Charger feat. So Charger allows you to basically do that anime piercing strike, charging across the battlefield, not taking opportunity attacks, and then just being able to fire off lots of damage, basically stacking on our various Paladin features and the like. And what I decided to combine this with is I kind of wanted to go for, like, okay, if we're doing kind of like a speedster Holy Knight with a rapier, let's throw, like, that we're going so fast that we're igniting the air around us. So this is a Holy Fire build. So we're doing fire and radiant damage. I've got the weapon that we've got here, which I've never actually featured on the channel before. This is called the Pelarson Blade? Whatever. You have attack rolls, against undead with this weapon have advantage, which is always nice. It's a +1 weapon normally, but it can become a +2 weapon thanks to the Drake Throat Glaive, which I've used to buff it with fire, making it a +2, giving us fire and radiant damage, because this weapon comes with a built-in extra d4 of radiant damage. That's just always there, which is great. Also, Paladin gets the dueling fighting style, so we get to add that onto it too. And it's another dexterity build in which I've decided to split the dexterity and charisma a bit more here. We get a ton of resistances here, thanks to some things I'll get into in a minute. And like I say, the Charger, basically the Charger, like I said, you basically charge in, deal weapon damage, and don't provoke opportunity attacks. And it does a little bit of extra damage on top, as you can see that +5 piercing at the bottom, which is really, really nice. It also has a shove variant, so you can slam into someone and push them away, but we'll mainly be using the Charger weapon attack. The big problem, though, is that Charger weapon attack uses both your action and your bonus action, and Paladin can be pretty bonus action F heavy, especially if you want to use spells. The smite spells, at least. So how do we get around that? Well, naturally we'd want a second bonus action, right? But we don't have access to Thief, as these are all single-class builds. So I grabbed the Pyro Quickness Hat. Again, if we're making a Radiant Fire build, we have access to a pretty powerful spell that Paladins get, Searing Smite. The only Smite spell here that actually scales, from level 1 at least, that scales with our spell slots, meaning we can make it more powerful. So the idea is, right, is that you run up to an enemy with some boosted movement speed, which some equipment will help us with, hit them with Searing Smite, which is why I've split the charisma and the dexterity a bit more, rather than just going all the way into dex. doing massive amounts of fire and radiant damage in a hit. Then, thanks to the Pyro Quickness hat, because this is a spell, we get a second bonus action, meaning that we can run in, obliterate an enemy with Sneering Smite, and then charge her away to the next enemy, zipping around the battlefield, dealing radiant and fire damage, as we're basically this flaming, burning, bright blur moving around the battlefield. It just feels amazing to play. It's a really fun and unique playstyle. Combine this with the Darkfire Shortbow, giving us resistance to fire and cold damage, which I felt like made sense for this build, and access to haste, increasing our movement speed and our action economy even further, allowing us to zip all over the place, doing smites, searing smites, charger attacks. It just feels amazing. This build is probably one of the most unique playstyles I've ever come up with. I haven't technically explored this kind of gameplay before, with my Arsenal build from a very, very long time ago, but I think this version of that kind of concept is just pushed to the limit here. I think this is one of the best ways you can kind of do it. You feel great. You've basically just made a speedster build, but with a unique twist on it, and I absolutely love it. Yes, it kind of relies on the Act 3 piece of equipment to kind of make the full thing work, but once you get there, oh boy. And I feel like there's some more kind of like anime-inspired kind of tropes that I've gone for here that I'll get to as we go. So yes, Charger is the unique feat for this build, actually, if you couldn't already tell. So let's get into the actual equipment. Obviously, I've already gone over the Pyro Quickness hat, giving us an extra bonus action when we deal fire damage with a leveled spell. For us, as I said, that's Searing Smite. Cindermoth Cloak, any creature that attacks us within 2 meters gets burned. I mean, yep, that just kind of makes sense. This is the build I've decided to use the Armour of Persistence on, because the Pyro Quickness hat burns us, which deals 1d4 of fire damage to us each turn. If we get fire resistance, which we've managed to do, plus the reducing all incoming damage by 2 from the Armour of Persistence, we actually cannot take damage from burning or the heat effect for that matter, because the most it can do is a d4, well, that gets cut in half to 2 because of resistance, and then that damage is reduced by 2, making it always 0. Not to mention that this armor also gives us resistance, giving us a bonus to saving throws, and blade ward, so strap that on with the fact that we're a melee fighter, and the fact that we have aura protection, you're basically never going to be failing your saving throws, meaning that unless you're knocked prone, which only really Steel Watchers can do off the top of my head, you're going to always have your concentration up, which is great. Now, the only thing I do understand is that if we cast haste on ourselves and then go to use Searing Smite, obviously haste is going to break. So you kind of need to decide if you want to go for haste or Searing Smite. Haste is not essential here, it's just a nice buff. Maybe if you're starting to run out of spell slots, so you can kind of switch modes. Obviously, you can't do both at the same time, but either way, you have a powerful playstyle here. Now, in a kind of like anime fashion, like the idea of pushing yourself beyond your limits but taking damage in the process, bit of a Kaioken maneuver, we've got the Martial Exertion Gloves. The Martial Exertion Gloves double your movement speed and give you an additional attack once per short rest. Basically an altered version of Action Surge. So but the caveat is you take a lot of damage. Now again, obviously this is physical piercing damage, so that is going to be resisted and reduced by the Armour of Persistence, meaning that even though you are going to take a decent chunk of damage, it's not going to be the worst it could possibly be. At most, I think it can be is like, what? Like, well, I don't know. It's half of 36. You do the math. I'm not very good at math on the fly. So basically, yeah, you're not going to really have too much problems with this combo. And again, it just amps up that speed aspect, giving you another attack, which is always fun. And of course, keeping up with the speed aspect, we're going to grab the Boots of Speed. If we have an extra bonus action lying around, which most of the time we should, we can use Click Heals to double our movement speed that way, and also make opportunity attacks against us have disadvantage. So basically, we can zip around the battlefield, and nothing's going to stop us. We also have the Moondrop Pendant here. This is kind of a throwaway slot, put whatever you like here, but basically, when the wearer has 50% hit points or less, they don't provoke opportunity attacks. So if we're in a sticky situation, we need to get away, we can just move out the way without even having to worry about it. So that exists. We also have the Emerald Ring, which is actually Crusher's Ring in the full game. This is, like, I think the early access name for it, and the way I add items into my inventory through mods gives me the early access names for some reason, but let's just go with it. This just increases our movement speed. You can change this for whatever you like, but again, it felt like it was on theme for the build, so feel free to switch this up. As well as the Ring of Free Action, meaning that we ignore the effects of difficult terrain and cannot be paralyzed or restrained, so nothing is going to stop us being able to move around the battlefield. Now let's get into very quick... Oh, I also do actually use a shield on this build, bumping up our AC to 22. This is the Shield of Devotion, which also gives us an extra level 1 spell slots for more smites, so there you go. I feel like this build looks okay with a shield, all things considered, although I like the build more without it aesthetically, but mechanically it's definitely better to use a shield. Let's get into some of the early game alternatives. For an early game weapon, you can grab the Sword of Screams, which kind of does the same thing as the Paladin Blade. It is a +0 weapon, but it does come with a built-in extra d4 of psychic damage, which is really nice to have, and again, you could buff this up with the Drakethroat Glaive once you get to Act 2, but this is an Act 1 weapon, which can really help you out. An early game headpiece could be the Haste Helm, giving you momentum, which will give you a boost to your movement speed at the start of combat. For an Act 2 armor, you could grab the Rippling Force Mail, which I think just looks really good on this build anyway. I think it's kind of a nice armor set. In fact, you might prefer it visually. But I think this one works out quite nicely. It gives you a unique status effect called Force Conduit whenever you take physical damage. And basically, it reduces that physical damage by 1 per turn remaining, and then when you have 5 or more turns remaining, you can explode and deal force damage if you take damage, which I think is kind of cool. And finally, as an alternative for the gloves, we have the Gloves of Heroism. Basically, if we use Channel Oath, which for us would be things like Holy Rebuke or Sacred Weapon, which aren't really that necessary to the build, but do still exist. We would also gain Heroism, giving us temporary HP and the immunity to being frightened, which is nice. Now, getting into the Oath of Devotion specific abilities. Aura of Devotion means that nearby allies cannot be charmed, and we already have Aura of Protection and Aura of Courage. So, I mentioned I guess as of recording, this would be yesterday's video, in my things I would change about Paladin video, that I would make it so Aura of Devotion also does Frightened or something. I forgot Aura of Courage existed in that video, so that's why I made that mistake. But yeah, and then as far as like spells and such we can go, I mean, we're mainly focusing on Searing Smite here, but the other smites also work. We also gain Sanctuary, which can be really nice in a pinch. Blinding Smite and stuff like that. Again, the spell variance here isn't very high because, well, we're all Paladins. But we also get Turn the Unholy, allowing us to turn Undead and Fiends that are nearby. So you just have a lot of options in general with this build. But yeah, the main strategy is Searing Smite and then Piercing Attack away with Charger. Again, a really fun, flashy playstyle that actually does synergize quite well with all of the features that it gets. So I really, really like this build. I think it's actually one of my personal favorite Paladin builds I've done. I feel like it's quite creative given the restriction, in my personal opinion, so I hope you enjoy using this one as well. Next up, the Oath of Vengeance. Dun, da, da. The big man. I mean, come on. I was going to do the Great Weapon Master, all in on the strength, Divine Smite into fucking oblivion. I mean, of course I was. How could I not? It's one of the classic playstyles of Paladin. It's one that I've messed around with before, but I really felt like with Oath of Vengeance specifically, it does really capture the kind of essence of what can make Paladin extremely strong. Basically maximizing Divine Smites, maximizing melee damage, and just going all in. So this build focuses less on the spellcaster side of things, although we do have ways of patching that up if we need to, and just goes for raw damage output. So let's get into it, because this one's obviously a bit less complicated. Obviously, we've got Great Weapon Master as our feat of choice, of course. We also have the Vow of Enmity, allowing us to gain advantage on attack rolls. If we cast it on ourselves, we get advantage against all enemies, meaning that we're always going to be able to make our Great Weapon Master hits, especially with the other kind of penalty negation things that we have going on. We have all the usual Smite stuff, we have all the usual Vengeance Paladin stuff, including increased movement speed from Relentless Avenger, that's what it's called. And we've also got the 2 auras that we always have as well. We also gain access to haste naturally, which can make us super, super strong, especially with the fact that our saving throws are so easily passed. It makes it very easy to get those off. We also have things like Hunter's Mark and Hold Person. I would also recommend actually using Elemental Weapon with this build here to give your weapon thunder damage, and I'll get into why in a minute, because we're not going to be concentrating on too many other things, so having Elemental Weapon be our main concentration is great. Anyways, let's get into the weapon. We have Baldur's Giant Slayer. Baldur's Giant Slayer is basically on a hit going to double the damage from our strength modifier, which is why we have our strength at 20, as well as giving you advantage on attack rolls against large, huge, or gargantuan creatures. So if you're fighting larger enemies, which are actually quite plentiful in the late game, you're going to do pretty well against them. You also gain access to a giant form, allowing you to gain temporary hit points, grow in size, deal an additional 1d6 damage, and have advantage on strength checks and saving throws. And again, combining this with Divine Smite, just to be able to get an absolute buttload of damage, as well as being able to buff yourself with all these other effects, it's great. I think this is basically like the most powerful pure single attacking build in the game. And again, between haste and extra attack, it's not just single attacks, you're going to be doing a lot. So the equipment for this is ultimately fairly standard for what I consider kind of the powerhouse Paladin. So let's get into it. Mask of Soul Perception, +2 bonus to attack rolls, initiative rolls, and perception checks. This is basically just going to help boost up the penalties that we do have. Again, Great Weapon Master inflicts a -5 penalty to attack rolls, so getting a +2 in addition to the advantage that we're going to be getting is basically going to make that penalty non-existent for us. Also, because this build has a lower dexterity score, that being about 12, this is basically the strength variant, where the other two builds were dex-based. We're going to have a slightly better chance to get ahead of our enemies in combat. Not a great chance, but it's better than nothing. And yeah, so this kind of just helps patch up some of the weaknesses of the build as far as the stats are concerned. We have the Armour of Devotion. Now, I was going to put this on one Paladin build, but I wasn't exactly sure which to give it to, but I decided on this one ultimately. Basically, as an action, you can recite your oath to regain a Channel Oath charge. Basically, what this would mean is that we can cast... Basically, for some reason, a battle lasts longer than 10 turns, we get to use Vow of Enmity twice. Or we can use Vow of Enmity and another one of our actually pretty decent Vengeance Paladin features. So I feel like it just gives us a bit more resources to work with, especially if you have hasted yourself and you get 2 actions. It's not going to feel as bad that you have to use this as an action on your turn. So I felt like it worked great here. And of course, I was going to feature these on one of the Paladin builds. We've got the Gloves of Belligerent Skies to start throwing around Reverberation. This can work with our Divine Smite, our Thunderous Smite, or if we buff our weapon with Thunder with Elemental Weapon, it will also work with that, allowing us to spread Reverberation around, which you guys already know what this does at this point. The affected entity has a penalty to their physical saving throws, as well as when they get enough stacks, they take extra thunder damage and fall prone, which, if they're prone, we get advantage to hit them, which is another way to get over Great Weapon Master's debuff. And overall, that helps support the whole party as well, because knocking enemies prone means that everyone gets advantage on the attacks against them, which is nice. And finally, for our boots, we have the Boots of Striding, meaning that while we're concentrating specifically on haste, we cannot be knocked prone. And it gives us a bit of momentum so we can get to enemies a bit quicker. Basically, this just makes it so that once we have haste activated between Aura of Protection and our other benefits, like for example, if we get Bless and such like that, there's pretty much no way we're going to be able to drop concentration on it unless you're like me and forget that one of the smite spells is concentration based and you cast it and then lose your haste. Because that totally happened in the combat footage, and I felt like an idiot at the time. But yes, haste is basically a cornerstone of this build, and these boots help maintain it. We also have access to the Spell Savant Amulet, giving us an extra level 2 spell slot for an extra smite. Of course, the Killer's Sweetheart, allowing us to basically guarantee an attack will be a critical hit after getting a kill. Which, again, that's a reaction that you can spend whenever you like, so basically you kill the creature, and then you can basically choose when you want to get a critical hit sometime later. Again, a guaranteed critical hit on a Paladin is huge, so we definitely want something like that. And finally, the Eversight Ring. We are going to have access to darkness in this party composition, so I thought that I would include this here, so that if you wanted to do Darkness Devil's Sight shenanigans with this team, you absolutely could. So I thought I'd throw this on here, but otherwise, if you're just running this build on its own, you can pick up the Ring of Spiteful Thunder, allowing you to, whenever you deal thunder damage to a reverberating creature, it becomes dazed, which means it can't take reactions and such like that, and has disadvantage on wisdom saving throws. And they also lose the dex bonus from their armor, so it just makes enemies overall a lot weaker. As well as, if you want some early game options for some of the equipment I've shown here, the only things we need that are really late game are obviously the sword and the helm. So for the sword, you can just go with the Sword of Justice. It's a +1 greatsword that gives you the ability to cast Shield of Faith without using a spell slot, great for the early game. As well as the Helm of Arcane Acuity, which you may actually prefer. Whenever you deal damage with a weapon attack, you gain Arcane Acuity for 2 turns, and since we're attacking with our weapon quite a lot, we can build this up quite quickly, giving us a +1 bonus to spell attack rolls and spell difficulty class for each remaining turn. So even though our dexterity is on the lower side, if we get off a ton of weapon attacks with this character, we'll be able to use our other spells that require saving throws much more effectively. So basically this helm can help patch up our lower overall charisma. Even though spellcasting is not the focus with this build, we can absolutely still use it. I mean, yeah, this is probably the most boring build out of all of these. I mean, it is just kind of your bog standard kill everything in one hit Paladin, but hey, it is one of the strengths of Paladin, and I felt like I should show it off in the party here. So then, of course, but then with that build kind of complete, there is, of course, the elephant in the room, so to speak. the Oathbreaker. Now, I think the usual take on Oathbreaker is, oh, they're evil because they broke their oath and they have dark necromantic powers. But I don't think that's the case here. All of these three characters that I've shown off, the Oath of Vengeance, who is so, you know, fueled by fury and a desire for revenge, that they want to kill things with as much power as they can get. They gain as much power as possible to dunk on their enemies as much as they can, right? Then we have the Holy Order Devotion Paladin type here, right? Who is so dedicated to their cause that they zip around the battlefield, they've honed their craft over and over and over again, and they decide to... And they basically they're just this, like, hoity-toity, everything they do is kind of just type, which obviously comes with its own problems. And then we also have the Ancients Druid, who is, again, a younger person who is so determined to protect nature and such like that, that they don't actually see how important the lives of people outside of nature can be, for example. And the kind of backgrounds I have for these guys is obviously this character here, the Ancients Paladin. They're an outlander, they've lived in the woods their whole life, but for some reason, with maybe the new stuff coming about from the Absolute, basically is threatening nature, so they've come out of the woodwork. Then we've got the Vengeance Paladin, who is a noble in their background, which, as a tiefling, is very, very hard to accomplish in a lot of cases. So the fact that his family, a family of nobles, were tieflings, and then something happened which has caused them to want to get revenge, you know, they're quite hot-headed. And again, I've already gone over how this character, they maybe weren't very wealthy, perhaps they worked their way up through diligence and hard work, and now can't really see the forest for the trees, for example. These three have all been brought together because of what's happening with the Absolute. They were all kind of captured on the Nautiloid and have now come together as a unified order. But again, they're hotheads, they're young, they follow their oaths to the letter, blindingly so, in order to obtain their goals. And there's one person here who they've also met that sees the issue with that. Our Oathbreaker Paladin. He's an old man. An old gnome. He has been through a lot in his life. Nobody knows, he won't admit to, nobody knows what oath he used to follow, what his goals were, what his ambitions were. He won't talk about it. All we know now is that at some point in his life, he broke his oath. Not out of, like, an evil act or something like that, but the fact that he just walked away. He retired. He moved away from whatever oath drove him because it ended up changing his life for the worse. He was so blinded by trying to follow his oath to attain his goals, basically the exact thing that this group of younger paladins is doing now, that it turned him into somewhat of a bitter old man. But he's still an extremely kind soul at heart. After retiring and breaking his oath, he realized he had these somewhat necromantic powers, and he decided to follow the teachings of some of the kinder gods of undeath in a way. So maybe a bit of Kalemvor here, maybe a little bit of Jergal, similar to Withers, and as such he started working with his necromantic powers to help guide souls into the peaceful afterlife, using things like Speak with Dead. I think this guy would actually maybe have a direct relationship with Withers in some way, not that kind of relationship, but they definitely maybe know each other and kind of work together on some sort of basis. And I think that with this build, I've kind of gone for more of a, like, obviously I'm playing to the strengths of the the Oathbreaker Paladin, and trying to focus on the unique features, but this build is kind of here just for flavor. Really, the Vengeance Paladin or any of these builds could easily be Oathbreakers as well, but I think this build puts a unique twist on it and kind of paints a picture of a Paladin that you're not actually used to seeing. One that's retired, and one that kind of deliberately broke their oath in the process. So, let's just get into it mechanically. So this build, again, I've kind of made it sort of an older character, but don't get me wrong, this doesn't mean they're a slouch. We're still focusing on strength and charisma here, with our dexterity being the lowest so far, and our constitution being on the middling side. We don't really need dexterity as much as this is a heavy armor build, and again, he's an old man. He's not exactly got a lot of spring in his step, still, despite the fact that he is a gnome. But I've also gone for something quite atypical for paladins, and I'm actually using a quarterstaff here, specifically the Staff of Cherished Necromancy. Creatures have disadvantage on saving throws against your necromancy spells. We don't get a lot of these, but we do get inflict wounds and such like that, and again, I'll get more into that in a minute. We also get bestow curse, which is quite nice, and animate dead. That's kind of the main things that the main like unique spells that we get as an Oathbreaker. We also get things like Darkness, Crown of Madness, and Control Undead and Dreadful Aspect, so we have a lot of interesting options here. But the Staff of Cherished Necromancy is also really cool because it works as a melee weapon. It's a +2 weapon with an extra d4 of necrotic damage, which means it actually fits our build quite nicely. And whenever the wielder kills a hostile creature with a spell, they greedily absorb its energy and gain life essence until their next long rest. Life Essence means that you can cast a necromancy spell without consuming a spell slot. Even though we're not getting some of the most powerful necromancy spells in the game, it doesn't matter. We like the ability to conserve our spell slots, and this gives us the ability to use things like our necromancy spells, like Inflict Wounds here, with a lot more freedom without having to worry about wasting Divine Smite slots. And as you can see here, we've got pretty decent Divine Smite power just looking at our stats there. And I think the idea of combining Necrotic and Radiant is always really, really fun. And of course, this build does come with a unique feat, and I think you guys are going to like this one. We've gone for Spell Sniper to pick up Bone Chill. I originally was going to pick up Eldritch Blast, but then when I went to choose the Spell Sniper feat, I saw the Bone Chill was one of the options, and now we have a ranged necrotic cantrip that prevents targets from healing until their next turn, which can, and also undead targets gain disadvantage on attack rolls. I think this is actually a really fun and unique kind of ranged option that we're not going to get through any other means, and it gives this Paladin a little bit of extra flavour. And I've also managed to work it into our base kit as well, so that it's not just for flavour, it actually does have some sort of mechanical benefit. But yeah, I thought the combination of picking up Bone Chill and making our Paladin use a quarterstaff gave it a really unique feel that most other Paladins don't have mechanically, so I quite like this overall. But let's get into the actual build itself. As I've already gone over the Staff of Cherished Necromancy, so we'll go into the main equipment. Obviously, Circle of Bones. Allied undead within 6 meters of resistance to physical damage, and you gain an extra usage of Animate Dead at level 3, which is the most we're going to get out of Oathbreaker Paladin on its own anyway, without needing to spend a spell slot. Again, spell slot conservation for Paladins is a must, so Circle of Bones is great for this build. Of course, I've gone with Reaper's Embrace, because if you're not going to wear your old man clothes, you might as well wear big Undead Lord armor. This is going to give us access to, this is basically going to make it so we're a bit more tanky. All incoming damage is reduced by 2. We also make it so that we can't be moved against our will by any spell or action, but have disadvantage on dex saves. This is actually a passive that you can toggle on and off. But we also gain Howl of the Dead, letting out a bone-chilling howl that numbs all nearby creatures. Movement speed is halved, and the spellcaster has advantage on attack rolls against the affected entities. It's removed by help or when hit by the spellcaster, so it's another way for us to gain advantage to be able to fish for those Divine Smite crits. And it felt quite on theme for the build. And again, if this character is related to Jergal in some way, taking Merkel's armor back is kind of nice lore-wise and thematically. We're also going to be getting the Dark Justicia Gauntlets to allow us to... This is just here to give us an additional 1d4 necrotic damage on our attacks, which is where that 2d4 necrotic comes from. And we've also got the Boots of Stormy Clamour. We actually do have a lot of things that allow us to inflict conditions. In fact, the Bone Chill cantrip does inflict the Bone Chill condition, which would allow us to spread Reverberation. Combining that with the Reverberation gained from our Vengeance Paladin, there's a nice little bit of team synergy going on there, meaning that this party can actually spread Reverberation as well as other effects. Of course, for the amulet, we're going with what is basically Jergal's amulet, giving us Speak with Dead. We get this basically at the same time we meet Withers for the first time, so it all kind of makes sense for this build thematically. As well as the Ring of Arcane Synergy. Since we're using the Bone Chill cantrip, let's make it worth our while, so that after we cast Bone Chill, we can basically do a Divine Smite on our next turn with an additional damage bonus equal to our spellcasting modifier, just tacking on even more damage. As well as the Crypt Lord Ring, giving us the ability to create undead. A level 6 undead mummy is going to be a super valuable ally that fits perfectly for this build thematically. But of course, I did actually play around with the idea of using the Ring of Exalted Marrow, which gives us some unique abilities, including Extort the Risen, basically allowing you to use the command spell on undead, and Ghoulish Touch, giving us an extra necrotic damage attack that can paralyze targets. This is just there for thematic reasons, and you can get this before you get the Crypt Lord Ring, so you can use that up until you get the Crypt Lord Ring. As for an Act 1 weapon, this one's actually kind of fun. This is Creation's Echo. I knew I wanted to use another, a quarterstaff. This one's kind of cool. If the wielder deals acid, fire, lightning, radiant, or necrotic damage, it becomes resistant to that damage type for 2 turns. This is one of the only ways I know of in the game to get radiant damage resistance. And I felt like for a paladin, that's actually a really cool thing to do. Giving us radiant or necrotic damage resistance is really, really cool. And this is obtained in Act 1, so it felt like I kind of had to show it off. And so I did. Here it is, Creation's Echo. Really, really unique extra effect. As for the armor, you do get this right at the end of Act 2, so it's basically an Act 3 armor, so if you want something slightly earlier, the Dwarven Splint Mail can actually be really useful, giving you a +2 to Constitution, helping out with concentration saves. Again, thanks to aura protection and all this other crap that we get with this party composition, saving throws aren't a huge issue, but this can help and give you a bit more HP as well. But yeah, that is our Oathbreaker. This, again, this retired old gnome who sees the destructive path that blindly following your oath can lead you down, and he sees that happening with these younger paladins, so he's almost become the dad of the group, trying to steer them on a path that makes them look beyond just what their initial goals are and think about things outside of that, look at the other side of things. Look at the people who could get hurt, or look at the people you could help if you do things a slightly different way. Like, even though he has these necromantic abilities which usually peg people as evil, he's not. In fact, if anything, he's using his necromantic powers to protect others, to gently guide souls to the afterlife, perhaps if they're wandering or lost, having his advantages against undead like he does. And again, he has this association with Jergal, perhaps, which could give totally different like context to his character. I think this is probably one of the most interesting takes on Oathbreaker I've ever seen. Again, I'm kind of tooting my own horn here, but I am quite proud of what I was able to do with this party composition. And again, that is the builds. I think overall this team is actually quite impressive. I was surprised again about how varied each character actually is. We have a healer, we have a summoner in a way, we have a that's focused on necrotic damage rather than radiant, we have a flaming speedster, and of course we have the typical Great Weapon Master knock you down in one hit character. Like, we have it all here. And of course, 4 powerful melee fighters. We saw this with the all-fighter party composition. It is strong. If it wasn't for, like, the extra 10 or 12 enemies showing up when they did after I raised a corpse, we easily would have won this encounter. Obviously, we kind of, if you watch the whole combat footage, which I don't know how long I'm going to be able to show because it was a really, really long encounter, we did kind of lose towards the end, but despite the fact that we took on, like, 25 enemies or so, there was only, like, 3 left, including, like, 2 fire elementals that got summoned, which all went down. So we put up a hell of a fight, and it was a good fight. There was all sorts, and it did get to showcase kind of everything that these builds are capable of. And yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm quite happy with how this turned out overall. I mean, I wasn't sure how exactly I was going to be able to make 4 distinct builds that all use just Paladin, but I think I actually made it work. The other kind of build that I didn't really touch on with this character, with any of these characters, but you could also kind of throw in there, would be to kind of go for like a ranged smite build, which I've kind of done before. If you get a branding smite, you could use that with a ranged weapon, which would allow you to kind of use like ranged smites in a way, but I would rather combine that with, like, because we have such limited spell slots, I would rather combine that with like Sorcerer to get as many spell slots as we could possibly get to be able to make that a bit more effective. But regardless, that is still an option there as well if you kind of wanted to explore another potential possibility. But yeah, I'm kind of just rambling on now so I can let the extremely long combat footage play on for as long as possible. So hopefully you can see as much of it as possible again, because I don't like to just leave the combat footage trailing off towards the end now. I kind of like to end it when my commentary ends, because I've had issues with copyright as far as that's concerned. Don't ask me why, it just happens sometimes. I know it seems strange, but hey, it happens. Anyways, yeah, I don't think there's much else really to discuss. I was planning to stream a bunch this weekend, but unfortunately, life kind of got in the way. Obviously, I'm trying to deal with a lot of family stuff at the moment, so I'm kind of busy here and there. And also, today, the day that this video is going up, which is the Wednesday, it's my birthday! So I'm taking the day for myself. And again, unfortunately, technical issues prevented me from streaming as much as I wanted to this past week. On Monday, I was intending to start the Pokemon Trainer run, but unfortunately, due to technical issues, I couldn't. I was getting really bad lag and stutter whenever I tried to stream, and I think I've fixed the issue. But I think I'm going to leave the start of the Pokemon Trainer stream for a really long stream on Saturday. I'm thinking I might start stream like a lot earlier, and people can just pop in and out as they see fit and kind of make it a big long playthrough, like chill session where we try and beat the challenge. I think that's my plan. So in lieu of a birthday stream on my actual birthday, I think on Saturday we're going to do a big stream, just a long stream, maybe 6 hours, I don't know. We'll see how I'm feeling. It all depends on how busy I am. I can't promise anything yet, but that's what I'd like to do. But yeah, I think that is going to do it for me. I don't think there's anything else I really need to say, but again, thank you all for your continued support of the channel. I know things are a bit slower than they were maybe a few months ago now, but the channel is still going. We're about 1,200 subscribers away from 10k now, which is a huge thing. We might actually achieve 10k before the end of the year if this keeps up, which would be insane. And I am going to be starting to weave in these new series that I'm planning. I think if I have the chance, the first episode of character creation, kind of an episode 0, where I kind of give you guys an idea of what the series is going to be like using an already existing character from the channel. I think you guys, that's going to probably come out on either Saturday or Sunday if I can manage to find the time. So I think that'll be really fun. I'm looking forward to that. I've got like a name and backstory and all that kind of written down. I just need to figure out the visuals side of things and then get recording. I might try and just get some B-roll footage of like BG3 of like some of the locations and such like that and just go from there, but we'll see. Anyways, that is going to do it from me. I will leave you guys all alone now. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.